The champagne flute slipped from my fingers, crystal shattering against marble as I stared at my own brushstrokes being sold for $330,000. Ashley stood beside the auctioneer, radiant in designer silk, accepting congratulations for her masterpiece, while I stood frozen in my server's uniform. 16 years I'd believed that painting was lost forever, destroyed in the basement flood that took everything else. But there it was, my signature carefully painted over with hers, my soul being sold to strangers, while my own daughter-in-law smiled like she'd created magic instead of committing the perfect crime. Comment your location and subscribe to stay connected. Time to dive into the story. Let me tell you how I ended up serving champagne at the very gallery where my stolen dreams were being auctioned off to the highest bidder. Because sometimes life has a twisted sense of humor, and sometimes that's exactly what you need to find your backbone again. 3 months earlier, I'd been Margaret Thompson, 68 years old and invisible to everyone except bill collectors and grocery store clerks who barely glanced up when I counted exact change. My husband Robert had been dead for 8 years, leaving me with a mortgage I couldn't afford and memories that didn't pay rent. My son David visited twice a year with his wife Ashley, just long enough to remind me how disappointed they were in my choices. "Mom, you could have been somebody," David would say, glancing around my cluttered apartment with that particular expression children reserve for parents who've failed to live up to their potential. All that talent just wasted. He wasn't wrong about the talent part. Once upon a time, Margaret Thompson had been Maggie Hartwell, the girl who painted landscapes so real you could smell the wildflowers and feel the morning mist. I'd won a scholarship to the Chicago Art Institute, had a gallery interested in my work, had dreams bigger than the small Kansas town where I grew up. Then Robert happened. Sweet, steady Robert with his accounting degree and sensible life plan. Marriage at 22, David at 24, and suddenly art became something I did when I had time. The studio became a guest room. The easel got moved to the garage. And eventually, the brushes got packed away in boxes marked someday. After Robert died, I'd tried to find those boxes, tried to remember who I used to be. But someday had been buried under 8 years of grief and financial struggle. The basement flood 2 years ago had taken what was left of my artistic past. Canvases, brushes, even the photographs of my work, gone, or so I thought. When David mentioned that Ashley had gotten a job at the prestigious Whitmore Gallery downtown, I'd felt a flutter of something that might have been pride. At least one person in the family was making something of themselves in the art world, even if it was just selling other people's dreams. "Ashley's doing really well," David had said during his last visit. "She's got such an eye for talent. Eleanor Price thinks she has real potential as a curator." I'd smiled and nodded, playing the supportive mother-in-law role I'd perfected over the years. What else was I going to say? That watching someone else live the life I'd given up made my chest feel like it was filled with broken glass? When Eleanor Price called me personally to offer a job serving at gallery events, I'd been too surprised to say no. "Ashley had recommended me," she said. "Thought I might enjoy being around art again." "It's not much," Eleanor had explained in her crisp, cultured voice. "Just serving champagne and canapes at openings and auctions. But Ashley mentioned you had an artistic background, and I prefer staff who appreciate what we're displaying." The pay was decent. And honestly, I needed the money. Social Security barely covered rent, let alone food and utilities. So I'd said yes, bought a simple black dress that didn't make me look like a discount store refugee, and showed up for my first event 3 weeks ago. The Whitmore Gallery was everything I'd dreamed of in my youth. White walls showcasing carefully curated pieces, perfect lighting that made every painting glow, hushed conversations where words like composition and brushwork were spoken with reverence. Walking through those rooms with a tray of champagne, I felt like a ghost visiting her own funeral. Ashley had been kind but distant during my first few shifts, acknowledging me with polite nods while she guided wealthy collectors through the exhibitions. She looked perfect in this environment. Sophisticated, educated, speaking the language of art with easy confidence. Everything I might have been if I'd made different choices. But tonight was special. Tonight was Ashley's first major auction as assistant curator, featuring emerging contemporary artists. The centerpiece was a landscape piece that Eleanor had called absolutely stunning during the preview. I'd been arranging champagne flutes for the early arrivals when I first saw it, displayed prominently in the main gallery with its own spotlight. The blood had rushed from my head so fast I'd gripped the serving table for support. It was my painting. Not similar to something I might have done, not reminiscent of my style. It was literally the landscape I'd painted of Miller's Creek in the summer of 2008, every brushstroke exactly as I remembered it. The creek winding through tall grass, the old oak tree with its gnarled branches, the afternoon light filtering through leaves I'd spent weeks perfecting. But the signature in the bottom right corner read, A. Thompson, in Ashley's careful script, painted over what I knew had been my own M. Hartwell. I'd stood there staring, telling myself I was wrong, mistaken. Maybe grief and age had scrambled my memories. Maybe I was seeing things that weren't there. But then I'd noticed the tiny flaw that proved it was mine. A spot near the creek where I'd accidentally mixed too much blue into the green and spent hours trying to fix it. The spot that looked like a mistake to everyone else, but meant hours of frustration to the artist who'd created it. My painting, my work, being sold with Ashley's name on it. The auction began at 8, and I served champagne with hands that barely trembled. On the outside, I was invisible Margaret Thompson in her simple black dress. On the inside, I was screaming. When the auctioneer called Lot 17, Ashley Thompson's remarkable debut piece, I'd positioned myself at the back of the room with a perfect view. The bidding started at $50,000. The price climbed steadily as hands shot up around the room, numbers being called that made my minimum wage existence feel even smaller. Ashley stood near the front, her face glowing with false modesty, as people congratulated her between bids. She was wearing the pearl necklace I'd given her for Christmas 2 years ago, back when I could still afford gifts that mattered. 100,000, 150, 200,000. David appeared beside her, his arm around her shoulders, both of them watching their future get brighter with every bid. Their future built on my stolen past. 300,000, 310, 330,000. Going once. That's when the champagne flute fell from my numb fingers, crystal exploding against the marble floor like a gunshot. Heads turned, Ashley's included, and for one terrible moment our eyes met across the crowded room. I saw recognition flash across her face. Not guilt, not shame. Recognition and calculation, like someone doing rapid math in their head. Sold $330,000 for this remarkable piece by Ashley Thompson. Applause filled the room while I knelt to pick up crystal shards with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. A security guard appeared beside me with a small broom, his voice kind but firm. "Don't worry about it, ma'am. Happens all the time at these events. Why don't you take a break?" I nodded and headed for the staff room, leaving behind the sound of celebration and the sight of Ashley accepting congratulations for selling my soul to strangers. In the tiny break room, I sat on a folding chair and stared at my hands. 68 years old, and I'd just watched my own daughter-in-law steal 16 years of my life in broad daylight. The worst part wasn't even the money, though $330,000 was more than I'd make in a decade of serving champagne. The worst part was how good she was at it. How naturally she accepted praise for work that had cost me months of early mornings and late nights, trying to capture light the way God intended it. But as I sat there surrounded by stacks of gallery programs and empty champagne boxes, something started burning in my chest that wasn't grief or shock. It was rage. Pure, clean rage that tasted like copper pennies and felt like electricity. Ashley Thompson had made a very expensive mistake tonight. She'd assumed that Margaret Thompson, the broken woman in the server's uniform, was the same person as Maggie Hartwell, the artist who'd once had the fire to dream impossible things. Time to remind her exactly who she'd decided to rob. I didn't go home after the auction. Instead, I drove to the all-night diner on 5th Street and ordered black coffee that tasted like regret while I tried to figure out how a painting I'd watched floodwater destroy 2 years ago had ended up in Ashley's art collection. The memory was crystal clear. I'd been down in the basement looking for David's old baseball cards when the pipe burst. Water everywhere, soaking through cardboard boxes and ruining everything I'd stored down there, including the wooden crate where I'd kept my finished paintings, the ones too painful to display but too precious to throw away. Or so I'd thought. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Pete Morrison, the contractor who'd done the flood cleanup. Pete had been Robert's bowling buddy back in the day, and he'd given me a deal on the restoration work. Maybe he'd remember something I'd forgotten. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Margaret? Jesus, what time is it?" "Pete, I need to ask you about the basement flood at my old house, the cleanup you did 2 years ago." "Margaret, it's after midnight. Can't this wait until morning? Did you save anything from those boxes? The ones that got water damaged?" A pause. "Some of it, yeah. Nothing you wanted to keep, you said. Told me to throw it all away." My heart started pounding. "Where did you throw it away?" "Well, that's the thing. My nephew Danny was helping with the cleanup, and he asked if he could take some of the art stuff. Said his girlfriend was into painting and might be able to restore some pieces. You told me you didn't care what happened to it." "Danny Morrison. Ashley's maiden name was Morrison." "Pete, what's your nephew Danny's last name?" "Morrison. Why?" "And his girlfriend. What was her name?" "Ashley something. Pretty girl, real interested in art. Said she might be able to save some of your paintings." "Why are you asking about this now?" I hung up without answering and sat in the diner booth, my coffee going cold while pieces clicked into place like bullets loading into a gun. Ashley Morrison. She'd been Ashley Morrison when she started dating David 8 years ago, fresh out of art school with a degree and no talent. I'd met her at Sunday dinner, watched her flip through art books and nod along when David talked about my wasted potential. She'd been so interested in my artistic background, asking questions about techniques and periods. I'd thought she was being polite, trying to bond with her future mother-in-law. Instead, she'd been shopping. The flood had been 2 years ago, just before David and Ashley got married. Perfect timing to acquire a collection of original artwork and plenty of time to plan how to use it. I drove home in the pre-dawn darkness, my mind clearer than it had been in years. By the time I reached my apartment, I had a plan that would have made Robert proud. He'd always said I was too trusting for my own good, but he'd also taught me to keep detailed records of everything important. In my bedroom closet, behind winter clothes I rarely needed, was a shoebox containing the documentation of my artistic life. Photographs of paintings, sketches, even some old exhibition programs from my college years. Everything I'd need to prove that Ashley Thompson's remarkable debut piece had been painted by Margaret Hartwell in the summer of 2008. I spread the photos across my kitchen table like playing cards, looking for the one I remembered taking of the Millers Creek landscape. There it was, third photo in the stack, showing my painting on the easel in the garage studio. The date stamp on the back read July 15th, 2008. The signature clearly visible was M. Hartwell, but I needed more than old photographs. I needed expert testimony, documentation, something that would hold up if this went legal. I made my first call at 9 in the morning to Dr. Patricia Wells, my old art professor at the community college. Patricia had kept in touch over the years, always encouraging me to get back to painting. She'd know how to verify artistic authenticity. "Margaret, what a lovely surprise. How are you doing?" "I'm doing better than I have in years, actually." "Patricia, I need your help with something unusual. How would someone go about proving they painted a specific artwork?" "Well, there are several methods. Photographic documentation, signature analysis, even paint composition testing in extreme cases. Why do you ask?" I told her everything. Ashley, the stolen painting, the auction, even Pete Morrison's nephew Danny. Patricia listened without interrupting, making occasional sounds that suggested she was taking notes. "Margaret, this is serious fraud we're talking about. Art fraud, the kind that involves federal charges and prison time." "I know. That's why I need to do this right. I can help you document your work and provide expert testimony about your artistic style and techniques. I still have some of your pieces from class, and I kept photographs of student work from that period." "But Margaret, you need to understand what you're taking on. This isn't just about the money." "What do you mean?" "Your daughter-in-law didn't just steal one painting. If she was willing to do this once, she's probably done it before. How many other pieces from your collection did she acquire during that flood cleanup?" The question hit me like ice water. I'd painted dozens of pieces over the years, maybe hundreds if you counted all the studies and smaller works. Pete had said Danny's girlfriend was interested in art stuff, not just one painting. "Patricia, I need your help to find out what else she might have taken. Come to my office this afternoon. Bring everything you have. We're going to build a case that will make the art world sit up and take notice. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the photographs scattered across the surface. Each one represented hours of work, pieces of my soul I'd thought were lost forever. How many of them were sitting in Ashley's apartment right now, waiting for their moment in the spotlight? My phone buzzed with a text from David. Ashley told me you were working the auction last night. How exciting that you got to see her big debut. We're taking her to celebrate tonight. Dinner at Romano's at 7 if you want to join us. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, I'd love to hear all about her artistic inspiration. Because if Ashley wanted to play the role of successful artist, she was going to discover that the woman she'd robbed had some very specific questions about where that inspiration came from. And Margaret Thompson, invisible server of champagne and forgotten mother-in-law, was done being polite. Romano's was the kind of restaurant where David took clients he wanted to impress, all white tablecloths and wine that cost more per bottle than I spent on groceries in a month. I arrived precisely at 7, wearing my best dress and the kind of smile that had gotten me through 40 years of marriage to a man who thought feelings were best kept to yourself. Ashley was radiant, holding court at a corner table, while David beamed beside her like a proud manager who'd discovered the next big thing. She'd changed from her gallery clothes into something soft and artistic, all flowing fabric and carefully arranged jewelry that whispered, successful creative type. Margaret! David stood to hug me, his cologne expensive and his enthusiasm genuine. I can't believe you got to see Ashley's triumph firsthand. What were the odds? Astronomical, I agreed, taking my seat across from them. Ashley, you must be thrilled. $330,000. Quite a return on investment. Her smile flickered for just a moment, too quick for David to notice. I've been working on that piece for months. It's wonderful when something you've poured your heart into finds the right home. Months, I repeated thoughtfully. Tell me about your process. Where did you find inspiration for such a detailed landscape? Ashley's eyes met mine across the candlelit table, and I saw her making calculations. How much did I know? How much did I suspect? How much could she afford to admit? I spend a lot of time outdoors, she said carefully. There's something about natural settings that speaks to me. The way light changes throughout the day, how water moves through landscapes. Miller's Creek is particularly beautiful in summer, I said, watching her face. This time the reaction wasn't quick enough to hide. Ashley's fork paused halfway to her mouth, and David glanced between us with the confused expression of someone who'd missed part of the conversation. I'm sorry, Ashley said. You're painting. It's Miller's Creek, isn't it? The old oak tree. The bend in the water where the current slows down. I used to take David there when he was little. Remember, honey? You loved catching minnows by that fallen log. David lit up with the memory. Oh my God, yes. We used to spend hours there. Ashley, I can't believe you painted our old fishing spot. When did you even see it? Ashley set down her fork with deliberate precision. I explore a lot of locations for inspiration. Sometimes I photograph places and work from memory later. That's fascinating, I said, leaning forward with the enthusiasm of someone genuinely interested. Because I could have sworn I saw some old photographs of that exact spot in my basement before the flood. Same angle, same lighting. What a coincidence that we'd both be drawn to capture it the same way. The silence stretched long enough for David to notice. He looked between Ashley and me with growing confusion. What flood? Margaret, what are you talking about? The basement flood 2 years ago. Remember? When that pipe burst and ruined all my old art supplies and paintings? Pete Morrison did the cleanup. Ashley had gone very still, her professional composure locked in place like armor. David mentioned you used to paint. Such a shame to lose your work that way. Oh, but it wasn't all lost, I said brightly. Pete's nephew Danny helped with the cleanup, and his girlfriend rescued some pieces. Thought she might be able to restore them. Isn't that wonderful? It's nice to know my old work found someone who appreciated it. David was frowning now, pieces clicking together in his engineer's mind. Ashley, your maiden name was Morrison. Is Danny your cousin? The waiter chose that moment to appear with our wine, giving Ashley time to construct her response. When he left, her smile was perfectly calibrated, apologetic but not guilty. I should have mentioned it earlier. Yes, Danny's my cousin. When he told me about the water-damaged paintings, I offered to look at them. Most were beyond saving, but a few had potential. I've been studying restoration techniques. So you restored Margaret's paintings? David asked, looking pleased at this family connection he'd somehow missed. I tried to save what I could, Ashley said. But restoration can be transformative. Sometimes you end up with something quite different from the original. I nodded thoughtfully. Different how? Well, water damage often obscures original signatures, makes it impossible to authenticate the original artist. And sometimes the restoration work is so extensive that it becomes a collaboration between the original artist and the restorer. The piece becomes something new. She was good, I had to admit, not just at lying, but at constructing lies that sounded reasonable to someone who didn't know better. David was nodding along, clearly impressed by his wife's artistic knowledge and generous spirit. That's amazing, Ashley. So Margaret's old paintings inspired your new work? In a way, she said, meeting my eyes directly. Sometimes the past provides a foundation for future creativity. I smiled and raised my wine glass. To future creativity built on solid foundations. We drank, and Ashley's hand was steady as glass, but I saw the message in her eyes, clear as painted words. I know that you know, and I'm not afraid. The rest of dinner passed with surface pleasantries, and David's excited chatter about Ashley's promising career. She'd been accepted into a group show next month, had 2 galleries interested in her work, possibly a solo exhibition in the spring, all built on the foundation of my stolen life's work. When we said goodbye in the restaurant parking lot, Ashley hugged me with the affection of a dutiful daughter-in-law. Thank you for coming tonight, Margaret. It means so much to have family support. Family should always look out for each other, I replied, squeezing her back with equal warmth. I can't wait to see what you come up with next. Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in years. Ashley thought she'd won this round by admitting to restoration work while claiming the artistic transformation as her own. She'd constructed a story that protected her from accusations of outright theft while still allowing her to profit from my work. But she'd made 2 critical mistakes tonight. First, she'd underestimated how much I'd learned about strategic patience during 40 years of marriage to Robert Thompson. And second, she'd assumed that Margaret Thompson, grieving widow and occasional champagne server, was the same person as Maggie Hartwell, who'd once been fierce enough to believe she could paint the world exactly as she saw it. Tomorrow, I'd call Dr. Wells and share Ashley's interesting theory about restoration as artistic collaboration. Then I'd call Pete Morrison and ask some very specific questions about exactly which pieces Danny had taken from my collection. Because if Ashley wanted to play the game of artistic attribution and collaborative restoration, I was about to teach her some rules she'd never learned in art school. Starting with the most important one, always know exactly who you're stealing from. Dr. Patricia Wells's office at the community college was exactly as I remembered it from my continuing education classes 15 years ago. Paintings covered every available wall space. Some professional pieces, but mostly student work that showed promise. She'd always believed in displaying potential alongside achievement. Margaret, you look different, she said, studying me over her reading glasses. Determined? I like it. I spread my documentation across her desk. Photographs, sketches, even the detailed notes I'd kept about paint colors and techniques for each piece. 40 years of marriage to an accountant had trained me to document everything. Tell me about this restoration theory Ashley presented, Patricia said, reviewing the photographs. She claimed water damage made original signatures unreadable, and that extensive restoration work creates a collaboration between original artist and restorer, essentially arguing that the restored piece becomes a new work of art. Patricia snorted. That's complete nonsense from a legal standpoint. Restoration work, no matter how extensive, doesn't transfer artistic ownership. If I restore a damaged Monet, I don't suddenly become co-creator of a Monet. The original artist remains the original artist. She pulled out a magnifying glass and examined the photograph of my Miller's Creek painting. Besides, this wasn't restoration work. This was forgery. Look at this signature analysis. She pointed to where Ashley's A. Thompson's signature appeared over my original M. Hartwell. Under magnification, you could see the different paint layers. See how the signature sits on top of the painting surface instead of being integrated into the final layer? Your original signature was painted over, not restored. That's deliberate fraud. Not artistic collaboration. What would hold up in court? Everything you've brought me, plus I can provide expert testimony about your artistic style and techniques. But Margaret, we need more evidence of the scope of this fraud. How many pieces are we talking about? I handed her the list I'd compiled after calling Pete Morrison that morning. 23 paintings, ranging from small studies to major works like the Miller's Creek landscape. Pete remembered because Danny had borrowed his truck twice to transport everything. My God, Patricia breathed. If she's selling these at auction prices similar to the Miller's Creek piece, we're talking about potential fraud worth millions of dollars. There's something else, I said, pulling out my phone. I did some research on Ashley's artistic career this morning. I'd spent hours online, tracing Ashley Thompson's professional history. Art school graduate with mediocre grades, no gallery representation before marrying David, no sales or exhibitions in her own name until 18 months ago. Then suddenly, a meteoric rise with sophisticated landscape work that garnered immediate critical attention. Her artistic style supposedly matured dramatically right around the time of my basement flood, I continued. Before that, her work was described as promising but lacking technical sophistication. Patricia was taking notes rapidly. We need to see her other pieces, the ones she's claimed as original work. I have an idea about that. Ashley mentioned she's in a group show next month at the Riverside Gallery. I could attend the opening. Better than that, Patricia said, her eyes lighting up with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found an intellectual puzzle worth solving. I know the curator at Riverside. Helen Martinez and I went to graduate school together. She'd be very interested in questions of artistic authenticity, especially if there's fraud involved. She reached for her phone. Helen, it's Patricia Wells. I need your help with something that might be right up your alley. How familiar are you with Ashley Thompson's work? I listened to one side of a conversation that grew increasingly interesting. Helen Martinez, apparently, had some concerns about Ashley Thompson's rapid artistic development. The sophistication of technique didn't match the timeline of her supposed artistic education. There had been whispers in the art community about the authenticity of her work. Helen wants to meet with you, Patricia said after hanging up. Tomorrow afternoon at 2. She's been building her own file on Ashley Thompson, and your documentation might be exactly what she needs. Driving home, I felt the satisfaction of pieces falling into place. Ashley had built her career on my stolen work, but she'd gotten greedy. Instead of selling 1 or 2 pieces quietly and building a modest reputation, she'd created a body of work too sophisticated for her supposed artistic background. That evening, David called with his usual weekly check-in. His voice was excited, full of news about Ashley's expanding opportunities. Mom, you won't believe this. Ashley just got offered a solo exhibition at the Whitmore Gallery in 6 months. Eleanor Price thinks she could be the next major landscape artist. We're talking about a 20-piece show with sale prices starting at $50,000. 20 pieces. The exact number I'd estimated Ashley had stolen from my collection. That's wonderful, dear. Ashley must be thrilled about the opportunity to display her life's work. She's been working non-stop, preparing new pieces for the show. I barely see her anymore. She's completely focused on making this exhibition perfect. I bet she was. Creating new, original works from stolen paintings probably took considerable time and effort. David, has Ashley ever talked about her artistic influences, where she draws inspiration from? You know, it's interesting you ask. She's mentioned studying historical landscape techniques, looking at how earlier artists captured natural light and water movement. She says, understanding the masters helps her develop her own voice. Understanding the masters, or understanding how to paint over their signatures and claim their work as her own. After hanging up, I sat in my quiet apartment and thought about justice. For 16 years, I'd believed my artistic life was finished. Not just ended, but erased, literally washed away in a basement flood that seemed like final proof that my creative dreams had been foolish all along. But my work hadn't been destroyed. It had been stolen. Its value finally recognized by someone who understood its worth better than I'd understood it myself. Ashley Thompson had built a career on the foundation of my artistic ability, and now she was planning a major exhibition to cement her reputation as a talented landscape artist. She'd made one crucial miscalculation, though. She'd assumed that Margaret Thompson, invisible serving woman in her simple black dress, would never discover what had been taken from her. And even if she did discover it, she'd never have the courage or knowledge to fight back. Tomorrow, I'd meet with Helen Martinez and add my documentation to whatever file she was building. Then I'd attend Ashley's group show opening and see exactly how many of my stolen pieces were being displayed under her name. Because Ashley Thompson was about to learn that some collaborations are less voluntary than others, and some restorations involve giving work back to its rightful creator. Helen Martinez met me at a coffee shop near the Riverside Gallery, carrying a leather portfolio that looked serious enough to contain legal documents. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of focused intensity that made her seem like someone who didn't waste time on small talk. "Mrs. Thompson, thank you for meeting with me. Patricia Wells showed me your documentation, and frankly, it confirms suspicions I've had about Ashley Thompson's work for months." She opened her portfolio and spread out photographs of Ashley's pieces from various exhibitions over the past year. 8 paintings total, all landscapes, all showing a level of technical sophistication that Helen found suspicious. "Look at this progression," she said, pointing to dates and venues. 18 months ago, Ashley Thompson was a recent art school graduate with basic skills. Then suddenly, she produces work like this. The photographs showed paintings I recognized, though Ashley had done enough alteration work that casual observers might not notice. My summer meadow study had become her wildflower reverie. My winter stream scene was now titled Frozen Contemplation. "The technical jump is impossible," Helen continued. "You don't go from student-level work to this kind of mastery in 18 months. Not without years of intensive study or access to work by master artists. Or access to finished paintings you can claim as your own," I said quietly. "Exactly. Patricia explained your flood situation and the connection through Ashley's cousin. Mrs. Thompson, I believe Ashley has been systematically passing off your work as her own, probably for over a year." Helen pulled out another set of photographs, these showing detailed shots of signatures and brushwork. "I've been documenting every piece of hers I could access. Look at these signature overlays." Under close examination, each painting showed the same pattern. Original signatures painted over with Ashley's careful script, just like the Miller's Creek landscape that had sold for $330,000. "This is systematic art fraud," Helen said firmly, "and next week's group show will give us the opportunity to document it properly. What do you need from me? I need you to attend the opening as my guest. Bring your documentation and be prepared to identify your original work. I'll have a photographer there to document everything we find." She handed me a business card. "There's something else you should know. I've been in contact with the FBI's art crime team. They've been investigating a rise in art fraud cases involving emerging artists, and Ashley Thompson's rapid success fits their pattern." FBI. The weight of what Ashley had done was starting to sink in. This wasn't just a family dispute about old paintings. This was federal crime. "Helen, what happens to David? My son. He has no idea what Ashley has been doing. If he's genuinely uninvolved, he should be fine legally. But Mrs. Thompson, this is going to destroy their marriage. Financial fraud, criminal charges, prison time. Your daughter-in-law is looking at serious consequences." I thought about David's excited phone calls, his pride in Ashley's success, his plans for their future built on her artistic career. 42 years old, and still naive enough to believe the best about people he loved. "He deserves to know the truth," I said finally. "The truth will come out regardless. The question is whether you want to control how and when, or let the FBI investigation proceed without your input." Friday morning, 1 week before the group show opening, I called David and asked him to meet me for lunch. He suggested our usual place, a casual restaurant where he could eat quickly between client meetings. He arrived exactly on time, already checking his phone for messages while he kissed my cheek in greeting. Success in his engineering consulting firm had made him busier but not necessarily happier. "How's Ashley's preparation for the show going?" I asked after we'd ordered. "Incredible. She's been working 16-hour days, perfecting every detail. The gallery wants her to include some earlier pieces to show artistic development, so she's been going through her whole portfolio. Earlier pieces, my stolen paintings that Ashley was planning to display as examples of her artistic growth. David, I need to tell you something important about Ashley's art." He looked up from his phone, finally giving me his full attention. What do you mean? I told him everything. The flood, Danny Morrison, the Miller's Creek painting at auction, my meetings with Dr. Wells and Helen Martinez. I kept my voice calm and factual, the way Robert used to present financial information to clients. David's face went through several stages: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally, a kind of sick comprehension as details clicked into place. Mom, this is insane. You're accusing my wife of art fraud. I'm telling you what I discovered when I saw my own painting being sold with her signature on it. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. You said Danny took damaged paintings for restoration. Maybe Ashley genuinely thought they were beyond saving and that her restoration work made them new pieces. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photograph Patricia had taken of the signature overlay on the Miller's Creek piece. Does this look like restoration work to you? David stared at the image for a long time. His engineering mind, trained to analyze structural problems and identify their causes, was applying the same logic to his marriage. Jesus Christ, he whispered finally. How many paintings are we talking about? 23 that I can document. Probably more that I didn't photograph or forgot about. And the value? If they're selling for prices similar to the Miller's Creek piece, potentially millions of dollars. David put his head in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes held the same devastated expression he'd worn at his father's funeral. What do I do, Mom? You talk to Ashley before next Friday's opening. Give her a chance to explain or come forward voluntarily. After that, Helen Martinez and the FBI will handle it. The FBI? His voice cracked slightly. Mom, Ashley could go to prison. Yes, I said gently. She could. We sat in silence for a few minutes while David processed the destruction of everything he'd thought his life was building toward. Finally, he spoke. She knew, didn't she? When you saw each other at the auction. That's why she's been so stressed about this upcoming show. I think she's known for a while that this day would come eventually. David's phone buzzed with a text, and he glanced at it automatically. Ashley, she wants to know if we can postpone dinner tonight because she needs to work late on preparation for the show. He looked at me with eyes that had aged several years in the last hour. I guess I know what she's really preparing for. Friday afternoon, as I got ready for Ashley's group show opening, I thought about the woman I'd been when I first walked into the Whitmore Gallery 3 months ago. Invisible Margaret Thompson, serving champagne to people living the life she'd given up. Grateful for minimum wage and afraid to want anything more than survival. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone who remembered what it felt like to believe in her own worth, to fight for what belonged to her, to refuse to disappear just because someone found it convenient. Ashley Thompson was about to discover that stealing from the wrong person can be the most expensive mistake you ever make. But first, she was going to have to explain to a room full of art experts exactly where her remarkable artistic talent had come from. And I was going to be there to help her tell that story. The Riverside Gallery opening was everything I'd expected from Ashley's world. Beautiful people holding wine glasses, speaking in hushed tones about artistic vision and emotional authenticity. I arrived fashionably late, wearing my best black dress and the pearl earrings Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary. Helen Martinez found me within minutes, accompanied by a young man with an expensive camera and the focused expression of someone documenting evidence. Margaret, this is James Chen, our photographer. He'll be taking detailed shots of everything we discuss. I nodded, feeling strangely calm despite knowing that tonight would change everything. Around me, people admired Ashley's remarkable artistic development, while I prepared to reveal exactly how that development had occurred. Ashley looked stunning in a flowing midnight blue dress, her hair swept up to show off diamond earrings that probably cost more than my rent. She was holding court near a painting I recognized as my autumn forest study, now titled Seasonal Transition, and priced at $45,000. Mrs. Thompson, she approached with her perfect gallery smile, air-kissing my cheeks like we were old friends. I'm so glad you could make it. David said you were feeling under the weather. I'm feeling much better now, I replied, studying her face for any sign that she knew tonight was different. Seeing your work displayed so beautifully is quite inspiring. Her smile never wavered, but I caught the quick glance she shot toward the gallery entrance. Looking for David, probably, or maybe Helen Martinez, whose reputation in the art authentication world Ashley would certainly know. I'd love to hear about your artistic process for this piece, I said. gesturing toward my stolen autumn forest. The way you've captured the light filtering through the leaves is remarkably sophisticated. Oh, you know how it is, Ashley laughed, the sound perfectly pitched for nearby listeners. Sometimes inspiration just strikes, and your hands seem to know exactly what to do. Indeed they do, especially when they've had years of practice capturing that exact lighting effect. This time her smile did falter, just for a moment. I'm sorry? Nothing important, I said pleasantly. I was just remembering how I used to spend hours in that same forest, studying how afternoon light changes the color temperature of autumn leaves. Ashley's eyes sharpened, and I saw her making rapid calculations. Around us, other gallery visitors continued their conversations, unaware that they were witnessing the opening moves of a much more serious game. Margaret, you should meet some of the other artists, Ashley said, her voice carrying a subtle warning. I'd hate for you to spend the evening dwelling on the past. Oh, I'm very interested in the present, and the future, for that matter. Helen Martinez appeared beside us with perfect timing. Ashley, congratulations on a wonderful showing. I'm Helen Martinez from the Riverside Curatorial staff. Could I ask you a few questions about your artistic development? I watched Ashley's face carefully as Helen introduced herself. Recognition and concern flashed across her features before being replaced by professional courtesy. Of course, though I should mention my husband will be arriving soon, and I promised to introduce him around. This won't take long, Helen said smoothly. I'm particularly interested in how your technique has evolved over the past 2 years. Your earlier work showed promise, but this level of sophistication represents quite a leap. Intensive study, Ashley replied, and mentorship from experienced artists. Could you tell me about these mentors? I'm always interested in how emerging artists develop their skills. Ashley glanced around the room, clearly looking for an escape route. It was mostly informal, learning from established techniques, studying historical approaches to landscape painting. Fascinating. And this piece? Helen gestured toward my autumn forest. The brushwork here shows mastery of techniques that usually take decades to develop. Sometimes talent develops in unexpected ways, Ashley said, her voice growing cooler. Helen pulled out her phone and showed Ashley a photograph. It was the picture I'd taken of my original autumn forest painting in 2007, complete with my signature and the date stamp on the back. Would you say this earlier version influenced your current work? The color drained from Ashley's face as she stared at the photograph. Around us, conversation continued, but the three of us stood in a bubble of sudden electric tension. I'm not sure what you're implying, Ashley said carefully. I'm not implying anything, Helen replied. I'm asking direct questions about artistic provenance and authenticity. Questions that the FBI art crime team will also be asking next week. Ashley's composure finally cracked. I think this conversation is over. Actually, I said quietly, I think it's just beginning. Because you see, Ashley, that photograph Helen just showed you? I took it 13 years ago of a painting I created. The same painting you've been selling as your own work. Ashley looked between Helen and me, her perfect gallery persona dissolving into something closer to panic. You can't prove anything. Oh, but we can, Helen said pleasantly. Signature analysis, paint composition testing, photographic documentation going back over a decade. Mrs. Thompson has been remarkably thorough in documenting her artistic work. David chose that moment to arrive, and I watched Ashley's face as she saw him approaching. He looked terrible, hollow-eyed and exhausted, like a man who'd spent the week watching his entire world collapse. Ashley, he said quietly when he reached us, we need to talk. Not here, she hissed. Not now. Then where? When? After the FBI arrests you? The words carried further than David intended, and nearby conversations began to falter as people turned to look at us. Ashley's career was built on reputation and connections, and David had just threatened both in front of her professional community. David, you're causing a scene, Ashley said through gritted teeth. I'm causing a scene? You've built our entire life on stolen art, and I'm the one causing problems? Helen stepped smoothly between them. Perhaps we should continue this discussion somewhere more private. But Ashley was already moving, pushing through the crowd toward the gallery's back exit. I followed, my heart pounding with the knowledge that everything was finally coming to a head. In the alley behind the gallery, Ashley turned on me with fury that was no longer hidden behind professional courtesy. You vindictive old woman. You couldn't stand that someone actually made something of your mediocre work. My mediocre work that you've sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Work that was rotting in your basement. Work you'd given up on. I saved those paintings and made them mean something. David stared at his wife like he'd never seen her before. Ashley, you stole from my mother. I rescued art from oblivion and gave it the recognition it deserved. Your mother was serving champagne for minimum wage while masterpieces gathered dust in her apartment. The casual cruelty of her words hit me like a physical blow. In Ashley's mind, I was just an obstacle to be removed. My life's work nothing more than raw material for her ambitions. You're right about one thing, I said quietly. I had given up, but you made a mistake, Ashley. You assumed I'd stay given up. Police sirens were growing louder in the distance. Helen had apparently made good on her threat to involve law enforcement. Ashley heard them too. Her expression shifted from fury to calculation as she realized her options were narrowing rapidly. This isn't over, she said, looking directly at me. You have no idea what you're destroying. I have every idea, I replied. I'm destroying a criminal enterprise built on my stolen life's work, and I'm enjoying every minute of it. The police cars turned into the alley, their lights painting the brick walls in red and blue. Ashley Thompson's career as a celebrated emerging artist was about to come to an abrupt end. But my career as someone who refused to be invisible was just getting started. The arrest was surprisingly anticlimactic. No dramatic handcuffs or shouting, just two federal agents in dark suits explaining Ashley's rights while she maintained her composure with the skill of someone who'd been preparing for this moment. Mrs. Hayes, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit art fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. I watched from the gallery doorway as they led her to an unmarked sedan. David stood motionless in the alley, looking like someone who'd just witnessed a car accident involving his entire future. Agent Sarah Martinez, no relation to Helen, apparently found me 20 minutes later as I sat in the gallery's back office, giving my statement to a young FBI technician named Williams. Mrs. Thompson, we're going to need your cooperation for the investigation. This case appears to be larger than we initially suspected. Larger how? Agent Martinez sat across from me, her expression serious. Your daughter-in-law wasn't working alone. We've been tracking a network of art fraud cases involving restoration work on supposedly damaged pieces. Ashley Thompson was part of a sophisticated operation. The implications hit me like ice water. How many other artists has she stolen from? We're not sure yet. But we've identified at least 12 other cases where emerging artists have shown suspicious improvements in technical skill, often coinciding with access to collections of damaged artwork. Williams looked up from his laptop. Mrs. Thompson, when you spoke with Pete Morrison about the cleanup, did he mention anyone else being interested in the damaged paintings? Danny Morrison was the only one he mentioned, Ashley's cousin. We need to talk to Danny Morrison, Agent Martinez said, and we need a complete inventory of every piece that was taken from your collection. Over the next 3 hours, I provided the most detailed artistic autobiography of my life. Every painting I could remember, techniques I'd used, even the specific brands of paint I'd preferred. Williams photographed my documentation while Agent Martinez asked questions that revealed just how much the FBI already knew about Ashley's operation. Mrs. Thompson, did Ashley ever mention other artists she was mentoring or collaborating with? I thought back to gallery conversations I'd overheard during my champagne serving days. She mentioned studying with historical landscape techniques, but I assumed she meant books or museum visits. We think she meant studying actual historical paintings that had been reported as damaged or destroyed. Insurance fraud combined with art theft, essentially. The scope of what Ashley had been involved in was staggering, not just stealing from one grieving widow, but participating in a systematic looting of American artistic heritage. David found me in the FBI office at midnight, looking like he'd aged a decade in a single evening. Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I know, honey. She's been lying to me for years, about everything. Her family background, her artistic training, even how we met. Agent Martinez looked up from her files. Mr. Thompson, what do you mean about how you met? David rubbed his eyes tiredly. Ashley told me she was working as a gallery assistant when we met, but tonight I found out she was actually working for a restoration company that specialized in insurance claims. She'd been targeting collections that had suffered damage. Including mine, I said quietly. Including yours. She researched you after learning about the flood through Danny. Found out you were a widow with no close family, someone who wouldn't be likely to pursue legal action even if she discovered what had been taken. The calculated nature of Ashley's crime was somehow worse than random theft. She'd studied my life, identified me as a suitable victim, and built a relationship with my son specifically to gain access to my stolen artwork. There's something else, David continued. I found files in her home office, documentation about other artists, other collections. Mom, Ashley wasn't just stealing your work. She was running a business built on art fraud. Agent Martinez leaned forward. What kind of documentation? Photographs, research notes, even financial projections about the value of stolen pieces. She had folders on dozens of artists. David, we need to see those files, Agent Martinez said. Tonight, if possible. They're in our home safe. Ashley doesn't know I have the combination. By 3 a.m, I found myself sitting in Ashley and David's pristine living room while FBI agents photographed the contents of a safe that contained the business records of a multi-million-dollar art fraud operation. The files were meticulous. Ashley had documented everything, where pieces were acquired, how much restoration work was needed to make them saleable, which galleries were likely to accept questionable provenance, even which art critics could be influenced to write positive reviews. My folder was thick, containing photographs of all 23 paintings Danny had taken, plus detailed notes about my artistic style and techniques. Ashley had studied my work more carefully than any art critic ever had. But what made my blood run cold was discovering that I wasn't Ashley's first victim. The files revealed a pattern going back 5 years, targeting elderly artists whose work had been reported as damaged or destroyed. Insurance payouts for lost collections that were actually being sold through Ashley's gallery connections. Mrs. Thompson, Agent Martinez said, holding up a photograph from Ashley's files. Have you ever seen this woman? The photo showed an elderly woman, maybe 75, standing beside a painting of ocean waves. Her face was radiant with pride and accomplishment. I don't think so. Who is she? Eleanor Caldwell. She died 2 years ago, supposedly in poverty, despite being a talented marine artist. Her family donated her remaining work to charity after her death. Agent Martinez showed me more photos from Eleanor's file. Dozens of paintings, all documented with the same meticulous attention Ashley had given my collection. We think Eleanor Caldwell's family was told her work had been destroyed in a house fire. Meanwhile, Ashley was selling Eleanor's paintings through high-end galleries, claiming them as her own early experiments with marine landscapes. The scope of Ashley's operation was breathtaking. Not just theft, but systematic looting disguised as artistic development, preying on families who trusted that their loved ones' legacies were being properly handled. How many artists total? I asked. We've identified 15 cases so far. Estimated value of stolen artwork approaches $8 million. $8 million worth of stolen dreams, stolen legacies, stolen life's work. Artists who died thinking their contributions to the world had been lost to floods and fires and accidents, never knowing their work was being celebrated and sold under someone else's name. Dawn was breaking as the FBI finished documenting Ashley's files. I stood on the front steps of the house I'd visited so many times for family dinners, watching agents carry boxes of evidence to unmarked cars. David appeared beside me, holding 2 cups of coffee that smelled like salvation. What happens now? He asked. Justice, I said, for Eleanor Caldwell and 14 other artists who deserved better, and recognition for work that never should have been forgotten. The morning sun was painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the kind of light that had inspired every landscape painting I'd ever created. For the first time in years, I looked at that light and felt the urge to paint it myself, to capture it with my own hands, instead of watching someone else claim credit for seeing beauty in the world. Ashley Thompson had stolen my past, but she'd accidentally given me something more valuable, the knowledge that my work had always been worth fighting for. The media attention began the next morning. "Emerging artist arrested in multi-million-dollar art fraud scheme" was the headline in every major newspaper, and by noon, my phone was ringing with reporters wanting to interview the elderly victim who brought down an art forgery ring. I let them go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to be anyone's inspiration story just yet. Dr. Patricia Wells called around 3 in the afternoon with news that made my hands shake. "Margaret, I've been contacted by the Whitmore Gallery. They want to host a retrospective of your original work. They're calling it Recovered, the Art of Margaret Hartwell. My work isn't famous enough for a retrospective. It is now. 16 of your pieces have been selling for six-figure prices over the past 2 years. You're already a recognized artist. You just didn't know it." The irony was sharp enough to cut. Ashley's theft had made me more successful than I'd ever been when I was actually creating the work. "Patricia, I haven't painted in 8 years. Then maybe it's time to start again." That evening, I drove to the storage unit where I'd kept Robert's things after selling the house. Behind boxes of his accounting files and old furniture, I found the art supplies I'd packed away after his death. Brushes still stiff with old paint, tubes of color that might still be usable, the small easel I'd used for quick studies. Loading everything into my car felt like an archaeological dig into my own past life. Who was Margaret Hartwell? Could she still exist? Or had too many years of being Robert's wife and David's mother erased her completely? I set up the easel in my apartment's tiny living room, facing the window that looked out over the city. The evening light was terrible for painting, but it was the light I had. The first brushstroke felt like coming home. I painted for 3 hours straight, losing myself in the familiar rhythm of color and composition. Nothing ambitious, just a simple study of the view from my window. But my hands remembered things my mind had forgotten. How to layer colors for depth, how to suggest texture with just a few quick strokes, how to capture light as it changed and moved. When I finally stepped back to look at what I'd created, tears blurred my vision. It wasn't my best work, but it was mine. Created by my hands, signed with my own name, belonging to no one but me. The next morning, I woke to find my story on the front page of the arts section. The reporter had found Eleanor Caldwell's daughter, who'd provided quotes about her mother's lost paintings being recovered through my case. "My mother died thinking her life's work had been destroyed," Linda Caldwell was quoted as saying. To learn that someone was selling her paintings and claiming credit for her artistic vision, it's devastating, but also validating. Mom's work was good enough to steal. I called Linda Caldwell that afternoon. She lived 3 hours away in the same coastal town where her mother had painted marine landscapes for 40 years. "Mrs. Caldwell, this is Margaret Thompson. Margaret Hartwell, I should say." "Oh my God, you're the one who brought this whole thing to light. I've been wanting to thank you. I think we should meet, all of us, all the families affected by Ashley's fraud." "That's a wonderful idea. There are things the FBI hasn't told the media yet, things about how extensive this operation really was." We arranged to meet the following Saturday at Eleanor Caldwell's former studio, which Linda had preserved exactly as her mother left it. The drive along the coast gave me time to think about legacy and recognition, about how Ashley's crime had revealed the value of work that was supposed to have been forgotten. Eleanor Caldwell's studio was a converted garage facing the ocean, with windows positioned to capture natural light throughout the day. Her final painting was still on the easel, an unfinished seascape that showed a master's understanding of water and light. Linda was a woman my age, maybe 65, with her mother's artistic eye and her father's practical nature. She'd been a teacher for 40 years, raising her own family while helping Eleanor maintain a modest career, selling paintings to local tourists and seasonal residents. "Mom never sold a painting for more than $500, Linda told me as we looked through Eleanor's remaining work. She always said she painted for joy, not money, but seeing her pieces sell for $50,000 each under someone else's name, it proves she was better than she ever knew. That's what hurts most. Mom died thinking she was just a hobbyist, a nice lady who painted pretty pictures for tourists. I understood that pain intimately. How many artists die believing their work wasn't important enough to matter, never knowing that someone else would later recognize its true value? Linda, I want to organize something. A group exhibition featuring recovered work from all the artists Ashley stole from. Not as victims, but as the accomplished artists we actually were. Linda's eyes lit up with the same enthusiasm I'd seen in Patricia Wells when she recognized a good idea. "A celebration instead of a memorial," she said. "Mom would have loved that." We spent the rest of the afternoon planning. Linda had contacts in the coastal art community, and I had newfound connections through the FBI investigation and media coverage. Together, we could create something that honored the original artists while exposing the full scope of Ashley's crimes. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the excitement of a project worth my full attention and energy. Not just recovering my stolen past, but building something new from the wreckage Ashley had created. My phone rang as I reached the city limits. David, calling with news that made me pull over to listen properly. "Mom," Ashley's lawyer called. "She wants to make a deal with the FBI. She's offering to provide information about the entire forgery network in exchange for reduced charges." "What kind of information?" "Names, locations, financial records. The FBI thinks she was just a mid-level operator in something much bigger." So Ashley wasn't the mastermind I'd assumed her to be. She was another kind of victim, recruited and used by people who'd recognized her desperation for artistic success and exploited it for their own profit. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it explained how a small-town art school graduate had managed to orchestrate such sophisticated fraud. She'd had help, guidance, probably threats to keep her in line. "David, how are you handling all this?" "I'm leaving her," he said quietly. "I have to, not just because of the fraud, but because she looked me in the eye for 3 years and lied about everything that mattered. I can't rebuild a marriage on that foundation." I thought about Robert, about 40 years of marriage built on honesty and shared values. David deserved that kind of partnership, not a relationship founded on calculated deception. "I'm sorry, honey. I know you loved her." I loved who I thought she was. Turns out that person never existed. After hanging up, I sat in my car watching sunset light paint the sky in colors that demanded to be captured on canvas. Tomorrow, I'd call the Whitmore Gallery about the retrospective. I'd start planning the group exhibition with Linda Caldwell. I'd begin the process of reclaiming Margaret Hartwell from the ashes of Margaret Thompson's invisible life. Ashley had stolen my past, but she'd accidentally shown me that I still had a future worth fighting for. The phone call came at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after Ashley's arrest. Agent Martinez sounded exhausted but grimly satisfied. "Mrs. Thompson, we need you to come in immediately. Ashley's cooperation has uncovered something we didn't expect." "What kind of something?" She wasn't just stealing from individual artists. She was part of a network that's been systematically looting museum storage facilities, insurance salvage operations, even estate sales. We're talking about organized crime on a national scale. An hour later, I sat in the FBI field office looking at photographs and documents that revealed the true scope of what Ashley had been involved in. Names, addresses, financial records stretching back over a decade. A criminal enterprise that had stolen millions of dollars worth of art from dozens of sources. "This isn't just fraud," Agent Martinez explained. "This is cultural theft. They've been erasing artistic legacies and redistributing them for profit." The centerpiece of Ashley's cooperation was a ledger containing detailed records of every piece that had been processed through their operation. Artists' names, acquisition methods, sale prices, gallery connections, a business plan for the systematic destruction of American artistic heritage. "Mrs. Thompson, your case was the key that broke this open. Without your documentation and willingness to pursue prosecution, we never would have discovered the full network." I studied the photographs of other stolen works, recognizing styles and techniques from different periods and regions. Abstract expressionist pieces from the 1960s, folk art from rural communities, even some works that appeared to be from museum collections. How is that possible? Museums have security, authentication procedures. Storage facilities are less secure than exhibition areas. Many museums have thousands of pieces in storage that rarely get reviewed or inventoried. A few missing items can go unnoticed for years, especially if they're replaced with documentation claiming the pieces were damaged or destroyed. Agent Martinez handed me a folder marked Recovery Operations. Inside were photographs of artwork being returned to families, museums and estate collections that had been told their pieces were lost forever. "This is what your courage made possible," she said. 17 families have gotten their loved ones' work back. 4 museums have recovered pieces they thought were permanently lost. And we've identified the location of approximately 300 additional stolen pieces. I looked at photo after photo of people holding paintings. Sculptures, drawings, artists' legacies returned to their rightful owners. Elderly women like Linda Caldwell seeing their mother's work again. Adult children discovering that their father's sculptures hadn't been destroyed in warehouse fires after all. What happens to Ashley? She'll serve time, but probably less than if she hadn't cooperated. The information she's provided will help us prosecute the organizers of this operation, people who've been stealing from artists for over a decade. That afternoon, I drove to David's apartment. He'd moved out of the house he'd shared with Ashley within days of her arrest. He looked healthier than he had in weeks, like someone who'd stopped carrying a weight he hadn't realized was there. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said about rebuilding your artistic career. What about it? I want to help, not financially. I know you don't need that anymore, but practically. You're going to need a studio, proper equipment, maybe assistance with exhibitions and marketing." The offer touched me more than he probably realized. David had spent years politely dismissing my artistic ambitions as hobbies, and now he was offering to help make them real. "David, are you sure? You have your own career to rebuild. My career is fine. It's my life that needs rebuilding. I want to do something that matters, something that helps instead of just making money." We spent the evening making plans. David would use his engineering background to help design a proper studio space, and his business connections to navigate the practical aspects of launching an artistic career at 68. I would focus on creating new work and organizing the group exhibition Linda Caldwell and I had been planning. The Whitmore Gallery had agreed to host Recovered, the Art of Margaret Hartwell in 6 months, giving me time to create new pieces alongside the exhibition of my original work. Eleanor Price had been surprisingly enthusiastic about the project, perhaps recognizing the publicity value of being associated with a case that had received national attention. "Margaret, you've become something of a folk hero in the art world," Eleanor had told me during our planning meeting. "The artist who brought down a forgery ring. People are fascinated by your story. I didn't want to be a folk hero. I wanted to be an artist. But if notoriety helped me rebuild my career and honor other stolen legacies, I could accept being both." That evening, I set up my easel and began work on a painting I'd been planning for weeks. Not a landscape this time, but a portrait. Eleanor Caldwell, painted from the photograph Linda had shown me, standing beside her easel with the ocean behind her. I wanted to capture something specific in Eleanor's expression, the quiet satisfaction of someone who knew her work was good, even if the world didn't recognize it yet. The confidence of an artist who painted for the right reasons, regardless of external validation. As I worked, I thought about legacy and recognition, about the difference between being seen and being valued. Ashley had made my work visible, but she'd tried to erase me in the process. The real victory wasn't recovering my stolen paintings. It was rediscovering the woman who'd created them. The phone rang at 11, interrupting my concentration. Linda Caldwell, calling with excitement that carried clearly across the phone line. "Margaret, I just got a call from the Norton Museum. They want to participate in our group exhibition. They're offering to host it in their main gallery, with full museum backing. A major museum exhibition for artists who'd been told their work wasn't important enough to preserve." "Linda, that's incredible. There's more. The FBI investigation has identified 43 artists whose work was stolen by this network. 43 families who thought their loved ones' legacies were gone forever." I thought about Eleanor Caldwell's unfinished seascape, still sitting on her easel like a promise waiting to be kept. About my own work, rescued from Ashley's fraud and returned to my name. About artists whose greatest recognition had come after someone tried to steal their contributions to the world. "Linda, we're not just organizing an exhibition. We're building a monument." To what? To the idea that no artist's work should ever be forgotten, and no thief should ever be allowed to steal someone else's vision of beauty. As I hung up and returned to my painting of Eleanor Caldwell, I realized something had fundamentally changed in how I saw my own life. 3 months ago, I'd been Margaret Thompson, invisible widow serving champagne to people living the life she'd given up. Tonight, I was Margaret Hartwell again, artist and advocate, painting portraits of women who refused to let their stories be erased. And tomorrow, I'd wake up and continue the work of making sure no one ever forgot the difference between the two. 6 months later, I stood in the main gallery of the Norton Museum, watching people study my portrait of Eleanor Caldwell with the kind of attention I'd dreamed of receiving my entire artistic life. The museum exhibition, Stolen Voices, Recovered Art, and Reclaimed Legacies, had drawn crowds from across the country, transforming a story about art theft into a celebration of artistic perseverance. But tonight's real victory wasn't the crowds or the critical acclaim. It was Linda Caldwell standing beside her mother's recovered seascapes, telling visitors about Eleanor's 40-year career, painting the same stretch of coastline with unwavering dedication to capturing light on water. She never wanted fame, Linda was explaining to a young art student. She wanted to paint what she saw beautifully and honestly. Fame was something other people worried about. The exhibition featured work from 38 of the 43 artists whose legacies had been stolen by Ashley's network. 5 families had chosen not to participate, preferring to keep their recovered pieces private. I understood their choice, even if I'd made a different one. Agent Martinez found me standing in front of my Miller's Creek landscape, the painting that had started everything when Ashley sold it for $330,000. Tonight, it was displayed with its original signature restored and a detailed placard explaining its journey from creation to theft to recovery. Mrs. Thompson, I wanted you to know. Ashley was sentenced this morning, 8 years federal prison, with possibility of parole in 5. I felt surprisingly little satisfaction at the news. Ashley's punishment wouldn't undo the damage she'd caused, and her cooperation had been essential to recovering hundreds of stolen pieces. What about the others? The people who recruited her? Most are facing much longer sentences. The organizer, a man named Marcus Webb, got 25 years. He'd been running this operation since 2008. Stealing from artists' estates and insurance claims across 15 states. 25 years seemed appropriate for someone who'd made a career of erasing other people's legacies. Webb would spend the rest of his productive life in prison, while the artists he'd robbed would finally receive the recognition they deserved all along. David appeared beside us, looking proud in the way parents do when their children exceed expectations. Mom, the Times reviewer wants to interview you about the new pieces you created for this show. I'd spent the past 6 months painting again, rediscovering techniques I'd forgotten, and developing new approaches to subjects that had fascinated me for decades. The 12 new paintings in tonight's exhibition represented the most sustained creative period of my life, work that belonged entirely to me, without question or theft. David, I'm not sure I'm ready for that level of attention. Mom? You've become one of the most recognized landscape artists in the country. The Whitney wants to acquire 3 of your pieces for their permanent collection. The Whitney Museum. I thought about 22-year-old Maggie Hartwell, fresh out of art school and dreaming of exactly this kind of recognition. She would have been terrified and thrilled by tonight's success. At 68, I felt mostly grateful. Dr. Patricia Wells joined our small group, carrying a champagne flute and wearing the satisfied expression of someone whose faith in a student had been completely vindicated. Margaret, I have news that I think will interest you. The community college wants to establish the Margaret Hartwell Scholarship for non-traditional art students. People who are returning to their artistic careers after raising families or changing life directions. Patricia, I can't have a scholarship named after me. I'm still learning how to be an artist again myself. That's exactly why you should have it named after you. You're proof that it's never too late to reclaim your creative life. As the evening continued, I found myself thinking about identity and reinvention, about the difference between who you are and who others decide you should be. For 8 years after Robert's death, I'd accepted the role of diminished widow, someone whose productive life was essentially finished. Ashley's theft had accidentally revealed that my productive life had never actually ended. It had just been interrupted. Eleanor Price from the Whitmore Gallery approached as I stood contemplating my newest painting, a self-portrait I'd titled Artist at Work, showing myself painting in my apartment studio. Margaret, I hope you'll consider a solo exhibition with us next year. Based on tonight's response, I think you could easily fill our main gallery. A solo exhibition at the Whitmore Gallery, where this entire journey had begun when I watched Ashley sell my stolen work. The symmetry was almost too perfect to believe. Eleanor, I'll need time to create enough new work for a full show. Take all the time you need. Good art can't be rushed. As the museum reception wound down and guests began leaving, I walked through the exhibition one final time. 43 artists represented, hundreds of people who'd come to see work that was supposed to have been lost forever. Stories of survival and recovery, of art that outlasted the people who tried to steal it. In the center of the main gallery, a video installation played interviews with family members talking about their recovered pieces. Linda Caldwell spoke about her mother's dedication to painting the same coastline for 40 years, finding something new in familiar subjects every single day. An elderly man named Robert Jimenez described his father's abstract paintings, created in the 1960s when few people understood or appreciated non-representational art. Work that had been dismissed as worthless when it was stolen, but recognized as significant by the time it was recovered. Each story was different, but they all shared the same themes: persistence, dedication to artistic vision regardless of external recognition, and the belief that creating beauty was a worthy way to spend a life. As I stood watching these testimonials, I realized that Ashley had accidentally given me something more valuable than the money she'd made from my stolen work. She'd forced me to defend my artistic identity, to prove that Margaret Hartwell had always been worth fighting for. David found me standing in front of Eleanor Caldwell's unfinished seascape, which Linda had loaned to the exhibition as a symbol of interrupted but continuing creative life. "Mom, are you ready to go home?" I looked around the gallery one more time, seeing my work displayed alongside pieces by artists whose names were now known because someone had tried to steal their legacies. "Yes," I said, linking my arm through his. "I'm ready to go home and paint." Because tomorrow morning, I'd wake up in my studio apartment and continue the work I'd begun 46 years ago when I first picked up a brush and decided that the world was beautiful enough to deserve careful attention. And this time, no one would ever be able to take that away from me.